What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Boardroom Podcast, where we help you stay calm, change lives, and have business on your terms. Now, I have a guest here with me, Dustin Riechmann. Did I say your last name?
So you nailed it, yeah.
Did I nail it? Okay, awesome. I kept saying it over and over in my head for like 10 times, making sure I nail it on the first try. But essentially, Dustin's a serial entrepreneur and the founder of sevenfigureLeap.com. It's actually a really great domain name, by the way.
Well,
how much did that run you? I'm like, wow, surprised nobody took that domain name. It's a short, sweet, easy to remember. But essentially, Dustin specializes in helping mission-driven experts build seven-figure brands by telling their story. Now, you're probably not the first person that I've met who helps people tell their story. But how did you even kind of transition to doing what you're doing now? Because serial entrepreneur, and now you're helping people build brands through storytelling. Like, what's the story behind that?
Yeah, I'll give a very brief version of my story. We can dig in wherever it might be of interest. But yeah, I got started professionally way back in the day as an engineer, and so I actually have a couple engineering degrees. Taught at a university, did a bunch of engineering consulting. And so I had a 15-year engineering career, but throughout most of my professional career, I also had side hustles. So I got actually pulled into the online world way back in 2009. My wife and I were doing marriage ministry. I got pulled into this opportunity to like share online and share our journey and share what we were teaching other couples in dusty church basements. And so that got me online. I wrote a book and did a bunch of speaking, and then caught the bug of digital marketing.
Yeah.
That pulled me out of engineering and did a bunch of marketing for different companies. And then one of those companies that I co-founded and was a partner in is called Fire Creek Snacks. So Fire Creek Snacks came out of a partnership with a local business. We grew an e-commerce brand. We're doing trade shows and traveling. And that pulled me into podcasting. And then podcasting in 2020 is really where I would say my story starts to pull a lot more into storytelling, getting people clear on their messaging, and some of the stuff that I'm known for today. So I'll leave it pretty broad and in general, so we don't talk for 20 minutes about my backstory. But that's really the story arc from professional life to like storyteller guy that people know me for online now.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I was going to think, with your engineering background, do you find some, like, it's been very useful in crafting like stories and just kind of like piecing different elements together?
Yeah, I do. I think in different ways. So my specialty in engineering was actually traffic engineering. So sometimes I tell people, I was a traffic engineer, and they're like, oh, cool. Like website traffic, in the world of online marketing. I'm like, no, like cars. But there's a lot of parallels actually, like the whole idea of directing traffic and controlling human behavior. Like that's really what you do as a traffic engineer. And so I think there's elements of that to help me become a good marketer. And then I do also think in the way we're taught in engineering school to approach problems, it's like everything is beginning with the end in mind. And so anytime I'm coaching someone on how to do an interview or how to talk from the stage and tell their story, I'm like, well, let's start with what you're going to ask the audience to do. And then from there, we'll come back and create the story that's true and relevant to that outcome. And so, yeah, I think the engineering process definitely plays a big role in how I've learned how to coach other people on telling stories.
Yeah, and I'm finding like the engineering process as a whole, some of the best problem solvers that we have on our team are engineers.
Yeah.
Right. It's like the process of engineering just seems to be a process for solving problems. And creating solutions, and that's kind of like the biggest theme that I've kind of gotten from it. So how applicable it can be in the online space, especially as an entrepreneur. You're just really, the bigger the problems you can solve, the more money you're going to make and the bigger impact you're going to have. Right? That's
and that's really all business is, right? It's just solving different problems every day, and people use a lot of different phrases. One I like is different levels, different devils. Like the idea that even as you continue to grow and you go from 6 to 7 to 8, whatever figure businesses, you still have problems to solve, right? They're just bigger and more valuable problems. Like the people that you're helping have bigger and more valuable problems, and your own business has bigger and more valuable problems. So I think that's like the constant in entrepreneurship is it's always problem solving. And so I think if you've got any sort of professional training in problem solving, it helps a lot. And engineering is obviously that's really what engineering is like how to solve problems in a professional way. So
yeah. So with the online space, I mean, you've been in this space since 2009, right? There's been so much. I got in this space in 2018, and how you market in 2018 and what worked from a direct response, even from an organic perspective, radically different than than where we are now. So kind of walk me through some of those like trends and things that you've seen change tactically. And then what are some things that have just kind of stayed tried and true as far as like core principles that you still really, no matter what the market is like, or specific principles that you're adhering to day in and day out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say a huge difference is back in 2009, things were very text-based. So that was the heyday of blogging, for anyone who knows what that means. It's like basically you wrote stuff online and then like you could guest blogs. So like there was enough interest in text-based creation that like I could go write a post on someone else's website, link back to mine, and people would come back and follow me. And so I feel like writing was like the key skill set. And then it really evolved pretty quickly. I mean, that was around the time that it was starting to take off as video content, right? Like everything kind of started to transition from written to video, long form video though, right? And then it, as you've seen over the past, 6 to 8 years, like from long form to short form. And in all of that, the story, the hook, like copywriting principles remain, like whether you're doing a short form 30-second video or you're doing a long blog post or you're writing a book, you still need, all the like common frameworks of copywriting. So you still need a hook. You still need to be able to back things up with facts, figures, and interest. You still have to have a call to action and a close, but it's often in more and more of a condensed format as we become more and more overwhelmed with information. So I feel like we've kind of entered this age now where, so it went from like information was novel. It's like, oh wow, like I can read a blog post about this topic and learn, wow, that's really cool. And then wow, and I can watch a video, that's even easier. Well, now I can watch a really condensed video, that's even easier. And now that everything has become so abundant and easily accessible, we've changed from an age of information into an age of what I would call like insight. So now it's really about curation. It's like, great, I know I can get all the information about anything ever through ChatGPT and search engines and everything else. Who can give me the best answer the quickest that's specific and personal to me, right? So now it's become much more about personalization and insight because there's such an overwhelming amount of information. So I don't know where this arc is going from here, but I feel like that's the arc I've observed in doing this for 15 years.
Yeah. I mean, that makes a ton of sense because one of the things that we talk about, even internally with our team, and one of the things that we train our language model on is like gathering their interests and then trying to make your questions or whatever you share, like making it as relevant to the prospect as possible.
Yes.
Right. If you can accomplish relevance in anything, you can start to gain some momentum. Right. So as you're kind of thinking about like the insights and being relevant, like how do you go about helping your clients do that? And how do you go about like figuring out how they can ultimately do that through storytelling? Right. Because you don't want them telling a story about from their childhood trauma if it's not applicable.
Yeah. But you do want them telling it if it is applicable. And I think that's a big part of it is in an age of, like, I know you're in the AI business and I'm a huge fan of AI, but I will say, like, I spoke on a couple months ago, earlier this year at Traffic and Conversion Summit, and 90% of the agenda was about AI as like AI tools and AI this and AI that. And I got on and I was talking about podcast guesting, but I kind of opened my talk with like, you know what? I like this emerging age of AI, which we should all embrace. It's a huge asset to all of us as marketers. Like, you still can't replace human to human connection. And the way that humans process, store, and retrieve information is through stories. So, I mean, in a very real sense, the way our brains work, like if you think of like PDF files on your computer, like that's story in your brain. Like you can't retrieve. And so I think the core here is relevance through story. And so you can tell different stories and you can tell different versions of your story depending on the audience to be relevant. But ultimately, you really just need to own your own story and let that attract and be a magnet to the right people. So I feel like now we're in this stage where like I'm not trying to be for the masses. I'm trying to be specialized for the people I really want to serve and care about. And the thing that's going to attract them is my own story or the stories of my clients, which are always a reflection of my own story anyway. And so I think that like that it's turned almost like inbound in a different way, like very different than like the old SEO inbound where I put in keywords and you're looking for stuff so you find me. Now it's like this, it's like attraction through resonance and people resonate with the story. And so that's kind of how I see where things have shifted to this point. I'm sure they're gonna continue to shift, even deeper into this.
And that makes a ton of sense. More than ever, and I've kind of even noticed this trend in our own business, is like people aren't buying tools, they're not buying programs, they're really buying coaching and they're buying proximity, right, to the people that they want to be close to the people that they want to be around, right? So it's not just about, all right, who has like the biggest followers, like, but who do I want to actually have close proximity with? And that's one of the trends that I really start to see.
Yeah, it's the broader term for that, I think proximity is a great term for that. If you're thinking about like proximity to a leader or a thought leader, someone I want to learn from, I think the more general term that applies to that and other things is community. So I think in this age of, again, like an abundance of information, tons of very shallow connections to people online, and lots of technology and tools and shortcuts and all the stuff that we have at our disposal, the thing that none of that can replace is community. Like at our core, we're tribal people. Like we're humans are tribal creatures, right? Like we're designed to be in like tribes and communities. That's how all of civilization has been like created and evolved. And that doesn't change even in an online environment. So I think for me, like to kind of put my money where my mouth is, like I've been running programs, all different shapes and sizes for years. For the last 2 years, I've had a really successful 90-day program, and it was always been in a mastermind format, which, scratches that itch. Like people are like, this is awesome. But what it lacked was continuity beyond that. And so one thing we've invested big time this year is creating an amazing community so that, yes, the 90-day experience happens in community. And on day 91, you're actually part of a bigger and better community. So now you're in with the alumni and there's a mastermind version. And I found that has really been a smart move. It's like it's everyone sticks around. Everyone is willing to pay for that because they can't imagine living without that community once they've experienced it. Community is a really hard thing to sell on the front end, but if you can deliver it, then people will pay for it on the back end. So.
Because on the back end, when somebody's plugged into a really good community, and I've got a few communities that I'm in that I'm like, you know what? I want to be a part of it. Even though I'm like at a point where I'm not getting a ton of like information from it. There's nothing novel, right? But it's the proximity with the people in the community that makes it valuable. And then that creates that network effect where as more people start to come in, if you do a good job making sure the right people are in the community, right, more people are going to want to be in it. And the longer they're going to want to stay around.
Yeah. And then it becomes the true network effect, which is the more people that are in the community, as long as it's well managed and well curated, the more people that are in there, the more valuable the community is, right? So then member 10 gets great value, but member 100 gets way more value. Member 1000 gets even more value as long as it's curated and ran well. That was like the whole Facebook model, right? It's like, that's truly a network effect where as it grows, it becomes more valuable, which creates a compounding effect because then more people want in and there's more people to promote because it's got a bigger network. So yeah, anyway, that has its own limits depending on the model that you're wanting to build, but and the level of intimacy, I guess, that you want to preserve. But in general, yeah, like the more the merrier, as long as everyone's on the same mission and they're all of similar values. Yep.
Yeah. So for you, what would you say is like the ethos or kind of like the value or core values for your community or just your organization as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, my organization as a whole, if people go to our About page, I have 6 values. They're right there on the About page. Like when we hire now, it's the very first thing on the job description is like, here's our core values. If you don't like this, you probably shouldn't apply because you're not going to like us. So I could go through those, but in in general, I think of the community, they are pretty consistent with my own core values because that's who I've attracted, to this community. Giving first is a huge one. Transparency is a huge one. Abundance is a huge one. So like thinking of these types of people who are mission driven, which means they really care about, they want more income. Of course, we're entrepreneurs, but that income is tied to impact. And that's the impact that really fulfills us, right? So mission driven. So they're really about income and impact, transparency, vulnerability, giving first, being of service. Those are the types of people that I attract. Yeah, to the point that I've had people be in the community for a while and send me a private message and be like, "Hey man, like I totally missed this in your marketing. Is this like a Christian community?" And I'm like, "No, it's not. Not everyone in here is actually Christian, but what you're feeling is the common values, right? Like, so they are not tied to a religion in this case. They could be, but they're not. And so, yeah. So, but I think when you do community well, then people do get the sense that like, you could call it a tribe. My wife has joked with me sometimes. She's like, "Are you running a cult?" I'm like, "I'm not running a cult." I'm like, I have a really strong community. They're very, they love each other. They're very tight knit. And so, I guess there's a fine line there, but yeah. So those are some of the values though, that I think I curate, when I create the 90-day groups. And then that of course transcends into the larger community when those people graduate and they are there in that alumni experience.
And that makes a lot of sense. And it makes sense why people are drawn to a community like that, because there's not a ton of them out there, right? Where it's going beyond like the surface of we're just trying to make more money. Right? Where it's like, no, it's like how we actually changing lives and the kind of impact that we're trying to make. And if you can have that, what that creates is a really good network effect where if the people in the community get to meet each other and to do business with each other, and you do a good job of making sure those who are in there have very similar values, now they can actually trust to do business with one another, because they're like, okay, if you're rolling with Dustin, then you probably, then you're probably not going to try and like screw me over. Right.
Yes. Yeah, pretty much everyone like in my community, like the first thing they say is, "Who here can like sell me this?" or "Who here can do this service?" Right? Because they really want to buy from each other. And that's not because of anything I've dictated. I don't get any cut of the action or anything like that. It's just, there's that trust, right? It's like, I know you're of a certain value. I know also that you've invested a certain amount if you've made it to this point and like you've done the 90-day program and now you're investing in this community. In many cases, they know each other because they were either in a 90-day cohort together, or they've gotten to know each other by being in the community. So there's a lot of that trust built in when you have a tight knit community that people respect each other, right?
Which is cool to see, because then the other thing that happens from what I've observed is it becomes very clear, like the community almost has its own kind of immune system.
Yes.
Where somebody comes in.
That's good. I like that.
And if they have just kind of skate under the radar and they come in and they're not really like have good intentions, they get spit out, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the white blood cells converge on them and just kick them out. Yeah. And I think that's all true. I think something too we kind of hit on this earlier with like front end and back end, and I don't know, maybe this will change over time as there becomes more of this awareness that like, I really want a community. But in general, people don't wake up in the morning or, stay up at night laying in their pillow thinking, "I really wish I had a community." It's one of those things when you see it. And so very tactically, and talk a little strategy here. I mean, what I've done purposefully is set up the model where it's sell them what they want and give them what they need, right? Which is kind of a classic marketing mantra. And when I sell them what they want, we deliver on that in a big way and actually over deliver it to what they need. And so like in my case, I teach podcast guesting. And so it's like podcast guesting as a marketing channel in our 90-day program promises people they will add $100,000 marketing channel through podcast guesting. And we create the system with them. We create a marketing flywheel and we do all that stuff. And everyone gets the promise. We have a guarantee. Like it's rock solid. And on day one, when someone signs up, most of them say, "Man, I'm here. I can't wait to do podcast guesting. I'm going to grow my business. I'm going to have a marketing channel." And we do all that. But then on day 91, when they're done and we say, "Hey, Iggy, like, what's your biggest takeaway? Why are you glad you did this?" They're all like, "Man, I got so clear on what I wanted. I got so clear on my messaging and my target market. And I'm so connected." It's like clarity and connection. And then like no one wants to buy clarity and connection, but in the reality, what they realize in getting it is they're like, that is the game changer. Like now
It really is.
business, I know who to hire. I know what I want to sell, and my offer is better. Because they had clarity on that stuff, and they got connected to people that they never knew they needed, right? Most people don't want more friends. They don't want any more Zoom meetings, but like when you do it right, they're like, I can't live without this. And so it is a tricky thing to set up your business towards community because it's really hard to sell as a standalone value. But when people experience it, they're like, this is amazing. So it's very sticky. Like there's great continuity when you do it well, but selling it on the front end is kind of a different question. So.
Yeah, because you're kind of like meeting them you're figuring out like what is the fire that they're trying to put out, right? And get them to a state where once that fire is out, then they can actually really appreciate all the things that you're trying to do for them, right? So when it comes to like storytelling, and you mentioned podcast guesting as your main channel that you teach your clients. How'd you get into that? What the heck is podcast guesting?
Yeah. So I mean, it's what I'm doing right now. So the simplest way to think of it is borrowing someone else's audience in a really cool way, right? So if I said, hey, you want to build your business, you should do podcasting. Almost everyone's going to think, oh, I got to like start a podcast. I got to like cover art and get a producer and get on iTunes. And you can do all that. I do have my own podcast now, but for 3.5 years, I built 2 different brands to 7 figures purely as a guest, which means I show up as the guest expert. I teach, I tell stories, whatever's most appropriate for that show. And then I have a call to action at the end, and some of the audience comes over and it like wants to work with me, and I grow my business. It goes way deeper than that. There's a lot more strategy behind it. And that's what we do for 90 days, right? But like on the surface, that is the model. It's, hey, you're an expert at what you do. You've got a case study. You've got your personal story. You got some value to add. Go and share that on other people's platforms who've already done all the work to create the podcast and have the audience. That's what podcast guesting is. And then how I got into it, I kind of alluded to this earlier. I was a partner in a physical products business called Fire Creek Snacks. We basically sold healthy meat sticks. So you think like Slim Jims, but like healthy, higher end premium. And so we were traveling around, going to trade shows and doing sampling in stores, all this stuff to grow our footprint for our brand. And it was working really well. And then, COVID happened, everything shut down. We couldn't do any of that stuff. And so I thought, what in the world am I going to do? And I had been listening to podcasts as a consumer. I was like, well, there's something to this. Like some of these big brands are like on here talking. So I was like, I'm going to try this. And so that's how I got into it. Summer of 2020, I pitched my first podcast, said, I think I have a great story for your audience. They said, yes, crushed that. It went really well. We sold some meat sticks. I did it again and again and started to develop relationships. We got big purchase orders. We got into Walmart. There's like a whole story that goes with that. And so that's how I got into it, was to grow my own business that was not related to coaching or podcasting or anything else. And then through doing that, what happens, like you become your own story. It's like, oh, Dustin, wow, how are you selling meat sticks on podcasts? Oh, well, let me tell you about it. And so as I started getting attention for doing it, then I started having people ask me to help them. And so that's really where this whole 7-figure lead business came from, is just organically from doing it for a different brand. People asked me how to do it. I started coaching them. I started figuring out there was a framework and a system. The engineer brain came into play, and I thought, this is a repeatable thing I can teach. So I did that, and then I started to see the value of the community aspect, and so it's evolved over the past several years into what it is today. But that was the genesis, was just like, I need to sell meat sticks to strangers on the internet because I can't drive to Chicago to the trade show because they just got canceled.
Yeah, that is a very interesting story. Like 2 7-figure brands off podcast guesting, and that just honestly, I'm in awe like almost every single week when I meet somebody completely different, right? Because everyone is found their own way to kind of get to the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
Like everyone's kind of carved out their own path. And it just continually reminds me that it's just really about like how resourceful you can be, right? Like if you can be creative and resourceful, like you can pretty much accomplish anything. And you're the first person that I met who used like their go-to-market strategy or their expansion was podcast guesting, right? So, and I mean, you kind of answered this question. So I was like, is there any specific verticals where this doesn't work, but you figured out how to make it work for selling meat sticks?
Yeah. I mean, I would say if you're here's who I know, here's who it works for universally.
Yeah.
An online business that can sell anywhere, at least in the United States, right? Like obviously it works internationally, but if English speaking in the United States, if you sell stuff that you can either ship or digital or you do coaching, podcast guesting is great. Now, if you're like a local dentist and you have one shop and it's geographically bound, there are parallels to podcast guesting that would work great, like local radio, lunch and learns, doing partner webinars with our partner live workshops with other specialists in your area. So we teach podcast guesting as like the vehicle, and it is universally, I mean, like
if you can
I've worked with some crazy
wide, then it can work.
Yeah, even regionally, but yeah, for sure. If you're nationwide, I mean, I've worked with some weird niches. I've helped people like an organic chicken farmer in California go to market with selling frozen organic chicken across the United States. So it's not industry specific. The people we typically work with, the people it works like super well for are coaches, consultants, agency owners, basically people that have a higher ticket service that's very scalable, because those models tend to require less volume and higher quality. And, the people who listen to podcasts, there's huge podcasts, but in general, what you're getting is a smaller audience that's very targeted. If they listen to you for 45 minutes, there's a high level of trust. So it's a very high converting channel, but it's not like the super volume channel. It's not, you know what I mean? So it has this like sweet spot, but I mean, I did a meat stick business. And like I mentioned, I've helped people in all kinds of weird verticals.
How do you make it repeatable and sustainable for the business? Are you thinking through tactically, or how many downloads does this podcast have? Or do you just really care about who is the audience of the podcast, like who they're serving? Is that number one, or what's your thought process as far as that goes?
Yeah, and it's a loaded question. We spend weeks on this. So there's lots of things that can provide value to you as a guest on a show, in addition to the audience, right? Like everyone thinks, hey, if I get on a show, they've got 1,000 listeners, 5 of them might want me to help coach them, and so they may come over and opt into my stuff and get on a strategy call. And if I get a client out of that, great. It's worth $10,000. It was totally worth it, And that math is fair and that's good, but it's just kind of one piece. We teach this kind of funny concept called the profit cake. And I just use a cake as an analogy because people can envision how they stack. So if you think of like the base layer of the cake, that's the audience. So there's a lot of them, but it's a very shallow layer, because almost no one who hears you is actually going to raise their hand and come out of the ether and say, look, I actually care about you and what you had to say. There's a lot of them, but they're going to have a lower impact each. They're still very important, and we still talk like that's who we're speaking to. So anyway, that's like layer one. Layer two, kind of right on top of that, is deeper and narrower. I call them like peers or partners. So these are centers of influence. These are collaborating partners. The host is almost always someone you want to have a relationship with. They're talking to a lot of people in your industry on a regular basis. You can do call outs in the interview to great partners. Yeah. So we'll kind of leave that there for now. And then layer three, the top of the cake in this world that I was talking about with higher ticket services, would be high ticket prospects.
Yeah.
So people to put in your pipeline that you choose that you would want to, go through your sales funnel. There's different strategies, but just to drive this home for people and make it really practical, one of the strategies we like to use is mining the guest list. So imagine Iggy's on a show. He's getting interviewed about his AI conversion tool, and they're like, wow, this is amazing. And he's talking to the audience about that. So layer one, he's like, hey, I got this thing, and then I got this free trial. You should come over and check it out. And some portion of the audience is going to be like, sweet, I really need this conversion tool. Well, maybe in the same interview at layer two, he's like, hey, if you're a lead generation agency, I would actually love to talk to you, because we don't do lead generation. We just do conversion. We'd probably have great referrals for you. And so you're calling out to peers. And that's just a very simple example. And as like a simple example of the third layer is the guest list, where I started this example. So now Iggy's been on this show. There's 200 other guests. He can go through, or we train a virtual assistant for you, to do this for you. Every show you're on, we're going to be sending that assistant to look through the other guests that have been on the same show And we're going to say, hey, this one's a potential client, this one's a potential referral partner, and this one has a podcast or another platform we could be on. And it just generates this amazing flywheel effect. So again, I could talk for 90 days about this, but like to give you a taste, like,
yeah, you got the
not
process
just
really
about the
dialed
audience.
in,
There's
like,
a lot of good reasons to be on the show beyond the audience, and hopefully that gives people a flavor. So
I think that's awesome. And I'm glad you got to share that, because it really explains that you got the process like really dialed in. It is something that truly can be scalable, repeatable, something that's predictable, which is one of the hardest thing when you're doing anything that's kind of like organic, right? It's like, how do you ultimately have a structure that allows you to have a little bit of predictability with growing the business through that channel, right? So you kind of nailed it by alluding to what some of those layers kind of look like to.
Yeah. So part of the scalability and the way that we do it is a virtual assistant. So, some of the stuff just requires legwork, like finding shows and writing pitches. We make it extremely streamlined to where it's just like 10% of the work to do ever. But that 10% needs to, I advocate strongly, it's done by a virtual assistant. It's not done by you as the entrepreneur. So your role is literally to show up and do your thing, talk, tell stories, and teach. And then like the example I just gave on the back end, all fueled by a virtual assistant, in some cases AI at this point. So there is work. It's not as quote unquote scalable as Facebook ads
where it's
pretend to be. But what it is it is repeatable, and it is very scalable on the nose, in the sense that you just gotta we recommend get on one show a week. It's 30 minutes, 45 minutes a week for you to devote as the entrepreneur. And you'll get those like consistent returns that you would expect from something like paid ads. But what you get that you don't get from paid ads are like unicorns, right? Like you never know which one relationship is going to change the trajectory of your business or life. And podcast guesting, in my application of it, is like the thing it's best at is building relationships at scale. So that's the real power. I mean, the stuff you would expect with leads and stuff is there, but like the real power is relationship building. So.
Yeah. I mean, and even if you think about, because I've recently been doing this and studying this quite a bit, and one of like the Fortune 500 companies, a lot of them are built through just relationships, right? That's really it. It's just been like through relationships and getting to know somebody who has like the audience or maybe the portfolio that you want to be able to kind of tap into and things like that. And it's just been a ton of relationships, right? So I've started to implement some of those strategies of just building relationships and thinking more long-term about, all right, how can I add value to this person, or how can I add value to the community? How can I show up? And it's just been, the crazy thing about it is like you start to see this compounding effect starts to happen as one connection leads to another. And your strategy with the podcast kind of puts that on steroids.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly it. It's like, and that's, again, people don't want to buy that. I mean, it takes a while to explain that, have people be like, that actually makes sense. What people want are like, I want leads. I want consistent leads. And you'll get that. Like if you do podcast guesting the way we teach it, like you'll get that. And that will satisfy the guarantee I'm going to make you when you come into my program. But the thing you're actually going to go brag about and send people referrals over our way for is the things I can't predict, which are these relationships, right? It's like, I met this woman or I met this guy and like this amazing collaboration happened, or they connected me to this CEO and it changed my life. We won't get into it today, but I kind of threw out Walmart. Like, it's not like I was being interviewed about Fire Creek snacks and the CEO of Walmart said, love your story. We'd like to have you on our shelves. Like, that's not the way the world works. But a guy who worked in finance, who was a mountain biker, was listening to the podcast. And he's like, I'd do anything I can to help you guys. I love your mission. I love your story. And he just sent an email, which found its way to the next person. And, it took 18 months, but we ended up on the shelves of Walmart. That would have never happened had I not done that interview. And that's like the power of relationships and the compounding effect of like the, whatever you want to call it, 6 degrees of separation. Like you never know where these seeds that you plant are actually going to like sprout up and reap rewards down the line. So
that makes so much sense. So for those who are listening, a lot of people, right, who are listening are coaches, consultants, agency owners, and service providers. So that's just kind of like my jam and the people that I've served in the past. How do they get a hold of you and get in touch with you? if they want to, even if they're just curious and just want to explore what it would look like to use podcast guesting as a viable acquisition channel for their business.
Absolutely. I mean, if they're listening to like, I just need to talk to Dustin, like this is something I want to do, just go to sevenfigureleap.com, our beautiful domain that Iggy bragged about earlier. So it's the number 7 with leap, sevenfigureleap.com. There will be a big button and a bunch of them that say schedule a call. And that's just going to get you on and have a call, very low pressure. If you would rather just check this out for yourself, this is brand new. We just created a scorecard. It's really cool. Like you basically go through and you think of your own business, your own needs, your own offer, your own lead generation, and you're going to go through. It's going to take 4 minutes. You're going to fill out a series of sliding scale questions about your business and your goals. And it's going to give you very specific, customized advice on whether podcast guesting is a good strategy. If it is, which sort of shows you should be on, what kind of angle should you use. So it's something I'm really proud of. And so that's at podcastguestscorecard.com. So podcastguestscorecard.com is totally free. People can get in there, check that out, score themselves, and get a really clear idea of whether podcast guesting would be a good marketing channel for their business.
Yeah. And I'll include both of those in the show notes, by the way. And is that something I'm going to be checking out, because I think I'm seeing the power of just the relationship building of being on a podcast and, being in communities and connecting with people. It really does create that kind of like that compounding effect as you meet one person that lead to another and so on and so forth. And you just don't know which ones are going to pop up, but it's got to be something
as a demonstration, if I can say it real quick.
Yeah.
So I was interested. So in my community, a guy named Nolan said, "Hey, I think, some of you guys should talk to Iggy. He's got a great show and he's looking for some guests." And so Nolan is a graduate of my program. And obviously he knew Iggy, and then he introduced me to Iggy. And now whoever's hearing this that only happened because of Nolan's connection. And so it's just, yes, this is a demonstration of like relationship marketing right in front of your eyes. I mean, we're doing it live right here as I'm being a guest on the show. So.
100%. So I think it's something that everyone, I mean, if you're really purpose driven, like one of our core values is like purpose driven greatness, like you got to be able to look at the bigger picture and think long term. Right. And it's like, it's not just about getting a return in the short term. It's like, how do I build something that's going to last long term? And how do I create these relationships that we don't know where they're going to go, but maybe 1 or 2 years down the line, an opportunity presents itself that never would have been presented to you if it wasn't for that initial relationship and that initial contact. All right. So I think for those of you guys listening, definitely worth checking them out. Domain is very easy, sevenfigureleap.com, and then share the podcast scoring with it.
Yeah, podcastguestscorecard.com.
Podcastguestscorecard.com.
And if you get lost, just go to Seven Figure Leap, send me a message. We'll make sure you're hooked up. Yeah, podcastguestscorecard.com at Seven Figure Leap. So yeah, we would love to chat with anyone who's looking to grow in relationship, grow communities, scale your coaching programs. And if you think podcast guesting might be a great way for you to do that, I think we got some amazing resources for you.
Yeah, we'll include that in the show notes again. Dustin, thank you for jumping on. Really, I'm actually really fascinated by like what your story and what you've done, and the vehicle by which you've done it is not anything I've actually seen or met anybody who's done it that way. So every single day, like you learn something new. So I appreciate the insights on that. For those of you guys who are listening, again, go to sevenfigureleap.com, easiest domain in the world. The other domain is going to be in the show notes as well to see the scorecard. But man, thank you so much for being on, and it was a pleasure.
Absolutely, it's been a pleasure to meet you, Iggy. Thanks for giving me a little time to share with your audience. It's been fun.
Absolutely. Take care, guys.